My name is Marin, and I just turned 28. Earlier tonight, my parents presented me with a birthday cake bearing the message, "Cheers to yet another year of total failure." The entire family had their phones aimed at my face, recording, waiting eagerly for me to collapse into tears. But I refused to give them that satisfaction. I expressed my gratitude for the meal and made my way toward the exit. However, right before stepping out, I uttered 3 simple words that sent the entire room into absolute chaos. Where in the world are you tuning in from today? Drop your city in the comments and smash that like and subscribe button if you've ever experienced feeling completely rejected by your own flesh and blood. Trust me, you'll want to stay for what unfolded next. Allow me to walk you through the events that brought me to this point, because this tale didn't begin with a vicious dessert. It began 28 years ago when I entered the Aldridge household, where being labeled the family letdown became my lifelong identity before I could even take my first steps. From my earliest memories, I understood that I was unlike everyone else in my clan. Not uniquely gifted different, fundamentally flawed different. My brother Everett dominated on the football field and accumulated medals that decorated every shelf in the living room. Meanwhile, I brought home grades that my parents would barely acknowledge before tossing them aside with obvious disappointment. My sister Hadley captured pageant crowns and filled scrapbooks with glittering photographs of her victories. I filled absolutely nothing except an unwanted chair at family meals. My parents, Cordelia and Sterling Aldridge, possessed extremely rigid definitions of achievement, and I failed to meet any of their standards. Everett was destined to become a professional athlete, they proclaimed. Hadley was destined to marry wealthy and produce stunning grandchildren. As for me, they never quite determined my purpose, and this became increasingly apparent as the years rolled by. Family events were especially merciless. Every birthday celebration, every holiday gathering, every milestone became another opportunity for relatives to catalog everything I wasn't achieving. Marin remains unattached. Aunt Rosalind would broadcast to everyone present as though I were invisible. Perhaps you should explore dating applications, sweetheart. Maybe aim a bit lower. Uncle Warren would contribute his invaluable observations regarding my professional decisions, my living situation, my vehicle, and essentially every choice I had ever made. The reality was, I wasn't actually floundering in life. I maintained a respectable position at an advertising agency, possessed my own place, and had even accumulated some savings. But within the Aldridge dynasty, respectable wasn't sufficient. If you weren't collecting championships, crowns, or executive titles, you were essentially non-existent. Actually, that's not entirely accurate. Non-existence would have been merciful. Instead, I was extremely visible as the family's living warning sign. Every discussion eventually circled around to what I ought to be doing differently, what mistakes I was making, or what lessons I could absorb from Everett and Hadley's clearly superior existence. Family gatherings became intensive seminars in thinly veiled criticism packaged as concern. "We only desire the best for you," became their signature phrase, typically accompanied by exhaustive explanations of why everything I had selected was obviously not the best for me. My profession lacked prestige. My apartment was undersized and poorly located. My romantic partners were never adequate, though they made certain to emphasize that I should feel fortunate anyone showed interest whatsoever. The most painful aspect wasn't even the overt criticism. It was the absolute absence of authentic curiosity about my existence. Whenever it completed a winning play, the entire family would reminisce about it for weeks. When Hadley secured a modeling contract, my mother would telephone every relative to broadcast the achievement. When I received a promotion at work, my father questioned whether they had selected the correct candidate. But here's the thing about enduring treatment as the family embarrassment for 3 decades. You begin cultivating particular abilities. You become exceptionally skilled at observing others, at detecting things they believe they're concealing. You learn to listen attentively to both what people verbalize and what they leave unspoken. And crucially, you learn to shield yourself. So when my parents telephoned last week with their unexpected invitation to a special birthday gathering, after years of barely recognizing my birthday existed, every protective instinct I had developed over 30 years began signaling that something was amiss. The telephone call arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was completing a client proposal. My mother's voice carried that artificially honeyed quality she only employed when she desired something, or when she was preparing to deliver particularly devastating commentary disguised as warmth. "Maren, sweetheart," she began, and I immediately recognized this would be fascinating. My mother hadn't addressed me as sweetheart since elementary school. "Your father and I were discussing, and we acknowledged we've been absolutely dreadful about properly celebrating your birthday." I stared at my monitor, questioning whether I was experiencing some stress-induced delusion. In 28 years, my parents had never once voiced remorse about their handling of my birthday. Their history spoke volumes. Forgotten occasions until someone jogged their memory, half-hearted observances that felt more obligatory than genuine, and presents that somehow always managed to feel like veiled insults. "Oh," I responded, "because what precisely do you articulate when your parents suddenly feign interest in something they've disregarded for decades?" "We want to compensate," she continued, her voice overflowing with enthusiasm that sounded approximately as sincere as a salesman's pitch. "We're organizing an authentic birthday celebration for you. A special dinner with the complete family. Absolutely everyone will attend. Everyone." That was certainly not an appealing prospect. Everyone in my family occupying the same space typically indicated I was about to become the evening's amusement, whether I consented or not. "Mother, that's genuinely unnecessary," I attempted. But she interrupted me. "Nonsense. We absolutely insist. It's the minimum we can do for our daughter. Saturday evening at 7. Dress appropriately." She hesitated, and I could practically perceive her deliberating. "Perhaps that navy dress you wore to Hadley's engagement celebration. You appeared almost attractive in that one." And there it materialized. Even when attempting something pleasant for me, my mother couldn't restrain herself. Almost attractive, because heaven forbid she deliver a compliment without a qualifying disclaimer. "I'll consider it," I replied, which was my default response to family invitations I had zero intention of accepting. "Oh, you'll attend." My father's voice emerged from the background. He'd been monitoring the entire exchange, evidently. "We've already extended invitations to everyone. Don't embarrass us. Don't embarrass us." That was rich, coming from individuals who had dedicated 3 decades to embarrassing me at every conceivable opportunity. After disconnecting, I remained at my desk attempting to decipher what scheme they were orchestrating. My parents didn't spontaneously develop parental affection overnight. They didn't awaken one morning and conclude they'd been mistreating me. And they absolutely didn't organize celebrations for individuals they regarded as family disappointments. Something was fundamentally wrong with this scenario, but I couldn't identify what precisely. Perhaps they intended to announce Everett's engagement, or Hadley's pregnancy. Perhaps they required my presence to help finance something since I was the sole family member with actual reserves. Or perhaps this was an elaborate setup for another round of public degradation, disguised as family connection. The more I contemplated it, the more persuaded I became that this dinner was a snare. But here's the peculiar thing about serving as the family target for 30 years. You cultivate a certain morbid fascination about exactly how far individuals will venture. You want to witness what innovative level of brutality they can devise. Partially because you can't quite accept it's genuine, and partially because you need to comprehend what you're confronting. So despite every logical instinct urging me to remain home, I found myself planning to attend this mysterious birthday dinner. Not because I anticipated anything positive emerging from it, and certainly not because I believed my parents had suddenly developed authentic affection for me. I was attending because I wanted to observe what they were genuinely plotting, and because honestly, I was exhausted from fleeing situations that would prove terrible regardless of whether I appeared or not. If they were scheming to humiliate me again, fine. At minimum this time, I would be prepared for it. At minimum this time, I wouldn't be caught off guard when the individuals who were supposed to cherish me decided to treat me as their personal entertainment. What I failed to recognize was that being prepared for humiliation and being prepared for what they actually had orchestrated were 2 entirely separate matters. Saturday materialized with the variety of overcast November atmosphere that renders everything slightly foreboding. I dedicated most of the day attempting to dissuade myself from attending, then attempting to persuade myself to attend, then questioning why I was even deliberating something that was obviously destined for disaster regardless of my decision. But curiosity prevailed, the way it perpetually does when you've been raised by individuals who specialize in psychological warfare, disguised as family customs. I selected my attire deliberately, not the navy dress my mother had recommended, because I wasn't about to accept wardrobe guidance from someone who had just labeled me almost attractive. Instead, I chose an elegant black dress that made me feel confident and heels that would permit me to make a dramatic departure if required. Because if this evening was destined to be a spectacle, I might as well appear impressive for my exit moment. The establishment they had selected was Vincenzo's, a moderately priced Italian restaurant where my family had commemorated every significant occasion for the preceding 15 years. Not because the cuisine was particularly exceptional, but because my father knew the proprietor and enjoyed pretending he was important enough to receive preferential service. The variety of venue where the illumination was sufficiently dim to conceal disappointment, and the wine was sufficiently affordable that my parents could manage to get everyone intoxicated. I arrived precisely punctual because timeliness was among the few things my parents had managed to instill in me that was genuinely beneficial. The hostess escorted me to a spacious circular table in the rear corner where my extended family was already assembled like predators circling something that wasn't entirely deceased yet. My parents, Cordelia and Sterling, occupied what they clearly considered the prominent positions, wearing matching expressions of barely suppressed excitement that made my stomach tighten. Everett and his wife Gemma flanked them on one side, while Hadley and her fiancé Beckett occupied the opposite side. Uncle Warren and Aunt Rosalind had secured the seats with the optimal view of whatever was about to transpire, and my cousins occupied the remaining positions. Everyone glanced up when I approached, and there was something in their expressions that validated every intuition I had possessed about this gathering. They appeared like individuals who were privy to a joke that was about to be unveiled. They appeared like individuals who were about to enjoy themselves at someone else's expense. "Marin," my mother called out, her voice pitched slightly too elevated. "You arrived. We were beginning to worry you had reconsidered." I settled into the only remaining seat, which had obviously been positioned to provide everyone else the perfect viewing angle of whatever reaction they were anticipating from me. Have you ever experienced the sensation of walking into an ambush, yet decided to trigger it anyway, merely to observe what transpires? Leave a comment below if you've been in that situation. The conversation during dinner was aggressively ordinary, which was somehow more disturbing than if they had simply been openly antagonistic. Everyone inquired about my profession, my residence, my romantic situation, all with the variety of intense curiosity my family had never exhibited previously. It felt like being interrogated by individuals who already recognized they weren't going to employ you, but wanted to document all the justifications why. Everett regaled us with narratives about his latest advancement. Hadley displayed her engagement ring for the 15th occasion, and discussed wedding arrangements that sounded like they cost more than most people's residences. My parents basked in their children's accomplishments like vegetation absorbing sunlight, while I sat there questioning when the inevitable would occur, because it was absolutely destined to occur. The artificial cheerfulness, the excessively attentive inquiries, the manner in which everyone kept checking their devices and exchanging glances when they assumed I wasn't observing. Everything indicated something orchestrated, something that demanded an audience and documentation. Approximately halfway through the meal, I began detecting subtle indications that something was planned. Hadley kept glancing at her phone, which was positioned at an unusual angle near her water glass. Everett had his device beside his plate, and I caught him tapping the screen when he believed I wasn't looking. Even Uncle Warren kept fidgeting with his phone in a manner that seemed unnatural for him. The realization struck me gradually. They were preparing to record whatever was approaching. That's when I recognized this wasn't merely destined to be another round of casual degradation disguised as family bonding. This was destined to be something larger, something they wanted to preserve and likely distribute, something they believed was going to be so entertaining that they needed to document it. I excused myself to visit the restroom, partially because I required a moment to process, and partially because I wanted to observe how they reacted when I departed the table. Predictably, the instant I stood up, I observed several of them lean forward in hushed conversation. Whatever they had orchestrated, they were discussing final details. In the restroom mirror, I examined my own reflection and attempted to prepare myself for whatever was approaching. 28 years of serving as this family's designated target should have prepared me for anything. But something about tonight felt different, larger, more intentional. When I returned to the table, the atmosphere had shifted again. Everyone was practically vibrating with anticipation, like children awaiting Christmas morning. My mother kept checking her watch. My father kept clearing his throat, and the devices had somehow become even more conspicuously positioned. "Well," my mother announced as the server cleared our dinner plates, "I believe it's time for dessert." And that's when I recognized whatever they had orchestrated. It was about to occur. The server vanished into the kitchen with instructions I couldn't quite discern, though from the manner in which my family members were all suddenly sitting more upright and reaching for their devices, I recognized the main event was about to commence. My mother was practically bouncing in her seat with excitement that she wasn't even attempting to conceal anymore. My father had that smug expression he always exhibited when he believed he was about to be particularly clever. Around the table, everyone else appeared like an audience settling in for a performance they had been eagerly anticipating. "You know, Marin," my mother said, her voice adopting that artificially saccharine tone that I now recognized had been her preliminary performance. "We really have been contemplating how we've handled your birthdays throughout the years." "Have you?" I asked, genuinely curious about where this was heading. "Oh, absolutely," she continued, glancing around the table for reinforcement from her co-conspirators. "And we acknowledge that perhaps we haven't been quite forthright enough with you." Forthright. That was an intriguing word selection coming from individuals who had dedicated the previous 2 hours pretending to care about my existence for the first time in decades. "We've determined that this year we want to present you with something truly meaningful," my father interjected. "Something that genuinely reflects who you are and what you represent to this family." The manner in which he articulated meaningful made my skin crawl. In my family, meaningful typically signified deliberately cruel, but camouflaged as concern or humor. It signified whatever was approaching next was destined to wound, but I would be expected to smile and appear grateful for it. Hadley leaned forward, her device now clearly in recording position. "We invested considerable thought into this, Marin. We genuinely wanted it to be special." Special? Correct. The identical way my family had always made me feel special, which was to say like a circus performer whose sole function was to entertain everyone else with my reactions to whatever they hurled at me. That's when the server returned, carrying a cake that made the entire table erupt in barely contained laughter. It was a standard sheet cake with white frosting. Nothing elaborate, but it was the inscription that made everyone begin reaching for their devices to capture my reaction. In bright blue frosting letters, the cake proclaimed, "Cheers to yet another year of total failure." The silence that followed was the variety of absolute stillness that only occurs when an entire room full of individuals is holding their breath, waiting to observe how someone will react to being publicly degraded. Every device at the table was now actively recording. Every face was focused on me with the intensity of individuals witnessing a collision occurring in slow motion. For just an instant, I experienced exactly what they desired me to experience, that familiar surge of humiliation and pain that had been my constant companion throughout childhood. The crushing weight of being reduced to entertainment for individuals who were supposed to cherish me. The bewilderment of attempting to comprehend how the individuals who brought me into this world could derive such obvious pleasure from attempting to destroy me. But then, something else emerged. Something that had been accumulating for 28 years of moments precisely like this one. A variety of crystalline clarity that made me recognize I was finished. I was finished pretending their cruelty was normal. I was finished fabricating excuses for individuals who had never demonstrated genuine kindness toward me. I was finished feeling grateful for fragments of attention from individuals who clearly perceived me as nothing more than a source of amusement. Most significantly, I was finished reacting the manner they expected me to react. Instead of tears, instead of rage, instead of fleeing or collapsing, I experienced something I had never experienced before in one of these circumstances. I experienced calm, completely, utterly calm. "Thank you," I said, looking directly at my mother. "This is precisely what I would anticipate from you." The confusion on their faces was immediate. This wasn't the script they had prepared for. They had expected tears or anger or some variety of dramatic breakdown they could film and likely share with their acquaintances afterward. They had expected me to perform my assigned role as the family victim. "It's merely a joke, sweetheart," my father said hastily, likely recognizing that my composed response wasn't what they had been hoping for. "You understand how we enjoy teasing." "Oh, I understand precisely how you enjoy teasing," I replied, rising from my seat. "You've been demonstrating it to me for 28 years. I retrieved my purse, smiled at the table full of individuals who were still clutching their devices like they weren't certain whether to continue recording or not, and proceeded toward the exit. But I wasn't finished yet, not remotely close, because for the first time in my existence, I wasn't departing as the victim of this family's cruelty. I was departing as someone who had finally discovered how to reverse the dynamic. I made it precisely 3 steps from the table before I halted and turned back around. Every instinct I had cultivated over 3 decades of serving as this family's punching bag instructed me to continue walking, to escape before they could inflict any additional damage, to return home and pretend this had never transpired. But for the first time in my existence, I wasn't heeding those instincts. Instead, I was listening to a voice that had been strengthening every day for the preceding few years. The voice that reminded me I was a grown woman with my own existence, my own profession, my own finances, and my own decisions. The voice that was exhausted from permitting these individuals to define my worth based on their own limitations. The voice that was absolutely finished with being anyone's victim. "You know what?" I said, my voice carrying clearly across the restaurant as I turned back to confront the table full of individuals who were still clutching their devices, still recording, still waiting for the breakdown they had been anticipating. "I want to express something." My mother's face illuminated with anticipation. This was likely what she had been hoping for throughout. Some variety of dramatic scene she could describe to her acquaintances for weeks afterward. Some confirmation that their assessment of me as a failure was accurate. "I want to thank all of you," I continued, walking back toward the table but not resuming my seat. "Genuinely, this has been incredibly enlightening." The confusion on their faces was beautiful. They had expected tears or rage or some variety of emotional explosion they could subsequently dismiss as me being overly sensitive or incapable of accepting a joke. They hadn't prepared for gratitude. "For 28 years, you've all demonstrated exactly who you are," I said, surveying the table and making eye contact with each individual who was still recording. "You've demonstrated that you're the variety of individuals who convene to orchestrate ways to wound someone you claim to cherish. You've demonstrated that you derive entertainment from someone else's suffering. You've demonstrated that you're the variety of individuals who film cruelty and label it family bonding." My father began to interject, but I raised my hand. "I'm not finished," I said, and something in my tone made him close his mouth. "You've also demonstrated that you're the variety of individuals who mistake kindness for weakness, who mistake someone's willingness to continue appearing for family as permission to treat them however you desire." I could observe them beginning to grow uncomfortable now. This wasn't proceeding according to their script. They had orchestrated to humiliate me, not receive a lecture about their behavior. "But here's what you didn't recognize," I said, and I could observe the first flicker of uncertainty cross several faces. "I've been recording tonight as well." The transformation in the room was immediate and electric. Devices that had been subtly recording suddenly vanished into purses and pockets. The confident expressions that had been so apparent just moments prior shifted into something considerably more uncertain. The instant I arrived and sensed something was amiss, I activated a recording application on my phone. I continued. "I've captured your excitement about what you had orchestrated, your obvious pleasure in executing it, and your reactions to my response. Everything from dinner conversation to this precise moment." My mother's face had gone completely pale. "Marin, sweetheart, you're overreacting. It was merely a joke." I finished for her. "Yes, I heard that portion. I recorded that portion as well." The panic was spreading now. I could observe it in their faces. The sudden realization that their little joke might have consequences they hadn't considered. "You wanted to film something tonight?" I said, slipping my device back into my purse. Congratulations. You succeeded. But I don't believe your performance is going to be quite as entertaining when individuals observe the complete context. When they observe a room full of adults orchestrating and executing deliberate cruelty against a family member. When they observe how excited you all were to film someone's humiliation. Uncle Warren was the first one to break. Now, Marin, there's no necessity to... To what? I asked. To demonstrate to individuals who you genuinely are? To permit them to witness what variety of family traditions you enjoy? I turned and walked toward the exit. But this time I made it entirely to the door before I delivered my final statement. Before I articulated the 3 words that would transform everything. Oh, and just so you're aware, I called back to the table full of individuals who were now sitting in stunned silence. I recorded everything. And then I departed from Vincenzo's restaurant, leaving behind 28 years of serving as the family victim and 28 years of accepting treatment that no one should ever have to accept from individuals who claim to cherish them. But I wasn't finished yet. Not remotely close. Because what they didn't recognize was that departing was merely the commencement. I sat in my vehicle in the parking lot for precisely 10 minutes, observing through the restaurant windows as my family attempted to comprehend what had just transpired. The panic was visible even from a distance. They were clearly engaged in some variety of heated discussion with extensive gesturing and what appeared to be finger-pointing. My device started buzzing almost immediately. First message from my mother. Marin, please don't do anything impulsive. It genuinely was merely intended to be humorous. Second message from Hadley. Why are you being so theatrical? It's not that significant. Third message from Everett. Return inside. Let's discuss this like mature adults. I deleted each message without responding and started my vehicle. I had work to accomplish and it couldn't wait until tomorrow. Have you ever experienced a moment where you recognized you held all the power, but everyone else still believed they were in control? Share your experience in the comments. The drive home required 20 minutes, during which my device continued buzzing with increasingly desperate messages from various family members. Each text confirmed what I already recognized. They were finally beginning to comprehend that their little joke might have consequences they hadn't anticipated. My apartment had never felt more welcoming than it did when I walked through the door that evening. For the first time in years, I felt like I was precisely where I belonged, surrounded by things I had selected, in a space that reflected who I actually was, rather than who my family believed I should be. I poured myself a glass of wine, changed into comfortable attire, and settled at my computer because the genuine work was merely commencing. First, I uploaded the recording I had made to a secure cloud storage account. Then, I created several backup copies and saved them to different locations. Whatever transpired next, I wanted to ensure the documentation of tonight's events couldn't vanish. Then I opened a new document and began typing. Not an angry tirade, not an emotional outburst, but a clear, factual account of what had occurred at dinner. The premeditation, the coordination, the filming, the obvious pleasure they had derived from orchestrating and executing something designed to cause me pain. I wrote about the pattern of behavior that had led to this moment. The years of casual cruelty disguised as family tradition. The manner in which they had systematically undermined my confidence while elevating my siblings. The constant message that I was less valuable, less worthy of respect, less deserving of basic human dignity. I wrote about how they had conditioned me to accept this treatment by framing any resistance as me being overly sensitive or incapable of accepting a joke. How they had convinced me that their behavior was normal, that all families functioned this manner, that I should feel grateful for any attention whatsoever. And I wrote about how that conditioning had finally collapsed, not because of tonight's cake, but because of everything that had led up to it. Because 3 decades of being treated as entertainment had finally reached the point where I couldn't pretend it was acceptable anymore. When I finished writing, I read through the document several times, ensuring every word was accurate and every emotion was conveyed without unnecessary drama. This wasn't about revenge, though I recognized that's how they would characterize it. This was about accountability. My device had been buzzing constantly while I wrote, but I had ignored it completely. Now, I scrolled through the messages that had accumulated, and they narrated a story of escalating panic. My father, this has gone too far. Delete whatever you recorded, and we'll forget this transpired. My mother. You're going to destroy this family over a silly prank. Uncle Warren. Your parents are worried sick. Stop being selfish and consider what this will do to everyone else. Hadley. I can't believe you're going to ruin my wedding over this. How can you be so vindictive? That last one actually made me laugh aloud. Hadley's wedding was still 8 months away, but somehow my refusal to accept humiliation quietly was going to ruin it. The logic was so perfectly representative of my family's mindset that it could have been a case study. I set my device aside and focused on the next phase of my plan, because documenting what had occurred was only the first step. The second step was ensuring the appropriate individuals witnessed it. I began with an email to my extended family, the aunts and uncles and cousins who had been hearing my parents' version of family narratives for years. The relatives who had been told I was difficult, ungrateful, overly sensitive, incapable of appreciating family humor, the individuals who had likely been hearing about tonight's dinner plans, and how hilarious they were destined to be. I attached the recording and my written account, along with a simple message, explaining that I wanted them to possess the complete context of tonight's events before they heard anyone else's version. Then I composed a longer email to my parents' acquaintances, the individuals who had been hearing for years about their challenging daughter, who simply couldn't seem to get her life together. I explained that they might be hearing some concerning stories about family conflict, and I wanted them to comprehend what had actually transpired. Finally, I drafted a very different variety of message for my own friends and colleagues. Individuals who had been listening to me fabricate excuses for my family's behavior for years, who had observed me minimize and rationalize treatment that they had attempted to tell me wasn't normal. By the time I finished, it was almost midnight, and my device had stopped buzzing. Either my family had given up attempting to reach me, or they had moved on to calling each other to determine damage control. I sent all the emails, finished my wine, and went to bed with a sensation I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in my adult existence, I felt proud of myself, not for any external achievement, not for meeting someone else's expectations, but for finally standing up for myself in a manner that mattered. Tomorrow, there would be consequences, phone calls, arguments, likely threats, and guilt trips, and every manipulation tactic my family had perfected over the decades. But tonight, I slept better than I had in years, knowing that I was finally finished being anyone's victim. The genuine story was merely commencing. Sunday morning brought the sound of my device ringing at 6:47 in the morning. I had deactivated notifications for texts the previous evening, but calls were still penetrating, and apparently my family had determined that early morning panic was their optimal strategy. I allowed it to go to voicemail. Then I allowed the next 5 calls to go to voicemail as well. By the time I finally dragged myself out of bed around 9 in the morning, I had 14 missed calls and 47 unread text messages. The progression from demanding to pleading to threatening was almost artistic in its desperation. What do you believe is going to transpire next? Drop your prediction in the comments and ensure you subscribe for the conclusion of this story. While I was preparing coffee, my doorbell began ringing. Continuous aggressive ringing that suggested someone was leaning on the button and refusing to relent. I looked through the peephole to observe my brother Everett standing on my doorstep, appearing like he hadn't slept. I opened the door but didn't invite him inside. "Myron, what the hell have you done?" he said without any preamble. "Mother's been crying all night. Father's discussing hiring attorneys. Do you have any idea what you've initiated?" "Good morning to you as well, Everett," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "Lovely weather we're experiencing." "This isn't humorous," he snapped. "Aunt Clarissa called Mother at 11 last evening. Uncle Jameson called at midnight. Everyone's witnessed your recording, and now the entire family is in chaos." "Interesting," I said. "And what precisely did Aunt Clarissa and Uncle Jameson have to express about the recording?" Everett's face shifted uncomfortably. "That's not the point. The point is, you're tearing this family apart over a stupid joke." "A stupid joke?" I repeated. "Is that what we're labeling it?" "Yes, that's what we're labeling it because that's what it was." But his voice lacked conviction, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Look, everyone recognizes you've always been sensitive about family matters." Sensitive. I set my coffee cup down and looked at my brother, genuinely looked at him. "Everett, Did you watch the recording? Of course I watched it. The entire thing? The portion where everyone's positioning their devices to film my reaction? The portion where mother and father are practically vibrating with excitement about wounding me? The portion where you all appear like you're settling in to observe a performance? His silence was answer enough. Here's what's fascinating about all this concern for family unity, I continued. For 28 years, you've observed them treat me like refuse. And you've never once been concerned about tearing the family apart. You've never telephoned me at 6 a.m. because you were concerned about my feelings. You've never appeared at my door demanding that someone apologize to me. That's different, he said weakly. How? Because he struggled for a moment, then seemed to abandon finding a logical explanation. Because now everyone's upset. Everyone's upset, I said slowly, meaning everyone except me. Because my feelings have never counted previously. So why would they begin counting now? Everett ran his hands through his hair, appearing genuinely distressed. Marin, I recognize things haven't always been perfect, but this is going too far. You're going to destroy relationships that can't be repaired. Good, I said, and the finality in my voice seemed to shock him. Some relationships should be destroyed. I began to close the door, but Everett placed his hand against it. Wait, he said. What do you want? What will it require to repair this? I halted and studied his face. You genuinely want to know what it would require? Yes. An acknowledgement that what occurred last evening wasn't a joke. It was deliberate cruelty orchestrated and executed by individuals who claim to cherish me. An apology not for the cake, but for 30 years of treating me like I don't matter. And consequences. Genuine consequences for individuals who believe it's acceptable to film someone's humiliation for entertainment. But that's not going to occur. I know, I said, which is why we're finished here. I closed the door and locked it, leaving Everett standing on my doorstep. Back inside, I finally examined my device. The messages had shifted from demanding to bargaining to threatening in perfect progression. My favorite was from Uncle Warren. You better repair this mess before it gets out of hand. Out of hand. As if systematically humiliating a family member wasn't already out of hand. As if 30 years of emotional abuse wasn't already out of hand. As if filming someone suffering for entertainment wasn't already so far out of hand that it had crossed into an entirely different universe. I was scrolling through the messages when I encountered one from my cousin Paige, Uncle Warren's daughter. Unlike the others, this one was different. Marin, I watched the recording. I'm so sorry. I had no idea they were orchestrating something like that. What they did was terrible and you didn't deserve it. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. I stared at that message for an extended time. It was the first genuine apology I had received in 24 hours, and it was from someone who hadn't even been present. Then I noticed something else. Several of the relatives who had received my email had begun calling my parents instead of calling me. The panic in my family's messages suggested that the responses they were receiving from extended family weren't quite what they had expected. Apparently, when individuals observed adults orchestrating and executing deliberate cruelty against a family member, they didn't find it nearly as amusing as my parents had hoped they would. That's when I recognized the evening's events had triggered a considerably larger chain reaction than anyone had anticipated. This wasn't merely about one humiliating dinner anymore. This was about 28 years of behavior that had finally been documented and shared with individuals who had only heard one version of the story. And for the first time, it wasn't my version being dismissed as oversensitive. It was my family's version being questioned by individuals they had expected to support them. 2 weeks after the dinner, I contacted Natasha Harrington, an attorney specializing in family emotional distress cases. She dedicated the first week reviewing all the materials I had sent her, the recording, my written account, and the subsequent messages from my family members. Monday morning of the following week, I finally met with her in person. Ms. Aldridge, she said when I arrived at her downtown office, I've reviewed everything you sent me. This is quite a situation you're confronting. Natasha was younger than I had expected, but possessed the variety of presence that suggested she had handled difficult cases previously. Her office was lined with certificates and awards, but what struck me most was a framed quotation on her desk. The truth will liberate you, but first it will make you miserable. I want to be transparent about something before we continue, she said, settling back in her chair. What occurred to you was wrong. Full stop. The level of premeditation and the fact that they filmed it for entertainment purposes takes this well beyond normal family conflict. I felt something relax in my chest that I hadn't even recognized was tense. Someone with legal training had examined the evidence and confirmed what I had known but had been doubting. This wasn't normal. This wasn't acceptable. This wasn't something I should merely overcome. However, Natasha continued, pursuing legal action against family members is complicated. Are you prepared for what that process will entail? I believe so, I said. What am I facing? Emotional distress claims can be challenging to prove, but the premeditation and filming work in your favor. The fact that this appears to be part of a long-term pattern of emotional abuse strengthens the case considerably. But your family will fight back, and they won't fight fairly. She wasn't incorrect. 3 weeks later, I received a visit from a process server delivering a cease and desist letter from my parents' attorney. Apparently, sharing recordings of my own humiliation constituted harassment and defamation according to their legal team. I forwarded the letter to Natasha, who telephoned me back the following day. This is precisely what I anticipated, she said. They're attempting to intimidate you into retreating. The letter is mostly bluster, but it indicates they're taking this seriously enough to hire legal representation. So what do? We file first, she said, and we file comprehensively. The emotional distress lawsuit we filed the following week was more detailed than I had expected. Natasha had dedicated weeks helping me document not merely Saturday's dinner, but years of similar incidents that established a pattern of deliberate psychological abuse. The financial damages we requested were significant enough to attract attention, but not so substantial as to appear unreasonable. During the preparation process, we confronted one challenge when my parents initially claimed the recording was illegally obtained. But Natasha successfully argued that I had every right to record conversations I was participating in, and their motion was denied. More significantly, filing the lawsuit had an immediate effect on my family's behavior. The angry telephone calls ceased. The text messages became more cautious. Someone had clearly explained to them that anything they said to me now could be utilized as evidence. But the genuine impact was on everyone else. My cousin Marlo telephoned me the Thursday after we filed the lawsuit, her voice trembling. Marin, I just wanted you to know that after I witnessed your recording, I began contemplating some things that occurred at family gatherings over the years. Things I observed but didn't genuinely process at the time. What variety of things? The manner in which they discussed you when you weren't present. The manner in which they orchestrated situations to make you uncomfortable. The manner in which they dismissed your achievements while celebrating everyone else's. I always believed it was merely typical family dynamics, but observing it all laid out like this. She paused. I'm ashamed that I never said anything. Marlo wasn't the only one. Throughout the weeks following the lawsuit filing, I received calls and messages from relatives who were suddenly viewing past family interactions through a different lens. Individuals were remembering comments they had dismissed, incidents they had rationalized, patterns they had never connected previously. The most significant call came from my grandmother on Friday afternoon, approximately a month after the dinner. Marin, dear, she said, her 84-year-old voice carrying more authority than I had heard from her in years. I've witnessed what your parents did, and I want you to know that I'm ashamed of them. My grandmother had always been the family matriarch, the individual whose opinion carried the most weight, whose approval everyone sought. For her to publicly condemn my parents' behavior was seismic. I've also witnessed the responses from other family members, she continued. And I want you to know that not everyone agrees with your parents' version of events. Some of us have been observing this pattern for years and wondering when someone would finally possess the courage to address it. Grandmother, You don't need to explain anything to me, dear. What you need to recognize is that your grandfather and I will not be attending any family gatherings where your parents are present until they make proper amends for their behavior. I sat in stunned silence. My grandparents were the center of all major family celebrations. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. birthday celebrations, all revolved around their residence and their participation. For them to boycott events until my parents apologized was unprecedented. Furthermore, my grandmother continued, I've spoken to several other family members who feel the same way. Your parents are going to discover that their behavior has consequences beyond merely their relationship with you. After we disconnected, I sat in my apartment attempting to process what was transpiring. What had commenced as me finally standing up for myself had become something considerably larger. My family's carefully constructed narrative about who was the problem and who was the victim was disintegrating under scrutiny from individuals they had expected to support them automatically. My device rang again. This time it was my mother, and her voice was different than I had ever heard it before. Frightened. Uncertain. Maren, she said carefully, your father and I believe perhaps we should all sit down and discuss the situation. What situation is that, Mother? There was an extended pause. You know what situation. No, I genuinely don't. Can you be more specific? Another pause. The misunderstanding from Saturday evening. Misunderstanding. I almost laughed. Is that what we're labeling it now? Maren, please. Your grandmother isn't speaking to us. Half the family has canceled plans. Your father's colleagues have witnessed the recording. This has gotten completely out of control. Interesting, I said. And what precisely is out of control about individuals observing who you genuinely are? That's not fair, she said. But her voice lacked conviction. You're making us appear like monsters over a simple prank. Mother, I said quietly, I didn't make you appear like anything. I merely showed individuals what you actually did. There was silence on the other end of the line. The difference between those two things, I continued, is everything. 6 weeks after the dinner, I was settling into a routine I hadn't experienced since childhood. Peace. My device wasn't constantly buzzing with family drama. My weekends weren't filled with obligatory gatherings where I would be the evening's entertainment. My stress levels had dropped so dramatically that I was sleeping through the night for the first time in years. The lawsuit was progressing steadily. My parents' attorney had filed several motions attempting to get the case dismissed, all of which had been denied. Discovery was moving forward, which meant my family was being compelled to produce evidence and answer questions under oath about their treatment of me over the years. The beautiful thing about legal discovery, Natasha had explained, is that it doesn't care about family loyalty or keeping secrets. It only cares about facts. Meanwhile, the social consequences of their behavior were expanding in ways none of us had anticipated. My father's co-workers at the insurance company where he had worked for 15 years had witnessed the recording. According to my cousin Thatcher, who worked in the same industry, my father was facing some uncomfortable conversations and strained relationships with colleagues who were questioning his judgment. My mother's book club had become noticeably uncomfortable around her after several members witnessed the recording. Her volunteer position at the local animal shelter became tense, as other volunteers expressed discomfort with the situation. Most significantly, their social circle was contracting gradually. Acquaintances who had known them for decades were distancing themselves, not merely because of what they had witnessed in the recording, but because they were beginning to question other behaviors they had witnessed over the years. I learned about most of these developments through my cousin Paige, who had become an unexpected ally in all of this. She telephoned me every few days to update me on family developments, and her reports painted a picture of a couple who were finally facing consequences for behavior they had never been held accountable for. Your Aunt Rosalind attempted to defend them initially, Paige told me during one of our calls. She kept saying it was merely family teasing and that you were overreacting. But then Uncle Desmond reminded her about the time they publicly mocked your college graduation speech, and the time they forgot to invite you to Everett's surprise party, and the way they always seated you at the children's table until you were 25, and Aunt Rosalind got quiet and hasn't brought it up since. I believe individuals are beginning to remember a lot of things they had previously written off as harmless family dynamics. The isolation my parents were experiencing was largely self-imposed. They could have acknowledged what they had done, apologized sincerely, and commenced the process of making amends. Instead, they had chosen to double down on their position that I was overreacting and that everyone else was being manipulated by my victim mentality. This strategy was backfiring spectacularly. During this period, I was building an existence that felt more authentically mine than anything I had ever experienced. Without the constant drain of family drama, I possessed energy for things I had forgotten I enjoyed. I commenced taking pottery classes. I joined a hiking group. I began dating again, something I had avoided for years because I had been too exhausted from family stress to maintain healthy relationships. Most significantly, I was discovering what it felt like to be around individuals who genuinely liked and respected me. Individuals who didn't perceive me as entertainment or as someone who required constant correction. Individuals who valued my opinions, celebrated my successes, and supported me during difficulties without making me feel grateful for basic human decency. The contrast was so stark that I began to comprehend just how abnormal my family relationships had been. I had become so accustomed to being treated poorly that I had forgotten what normal human interaction felt like. My new hiking group included a woman named Sienna, who worked as a therapist. During one of our conversations about family relationships, she made an observation that remained with me. "Healthy families want their members to thrive," she said. "They celebrate each other's successes, support each other during failures, and create environments where everyone feels valued and respected. Unhealthy families require someone to be the problem, so everyone else can feel superior by comparison." "What occurs when the designated problem individual leaves?" I asked. "Usually they attempt to pull that individual back in. And if that doesn't work, they find a new individual to fill the role. But sometimes if enough individuals leave or establish boundaries, the entire system has to change." That conversation helped me comprehend something important about what was occurring with my extended family. For years, they had enabled my parents' behavior because it didn't directly affect them, and because having me as the family scapegoat meant they weren't at risk of becoming targets themselves. But now that the behavior was documented and public, they had to choose between continuing to enable it or acknowledging that it was wrong. Many of them were choosing acknowledgement, which meant my parents were losing the support system that had permitted their behavior to continue unchecked. 3 months after the dinner, my grandmother telephoned with an update that surprised even me. "Your parents came to visit us yesterday," she said. "They wanted us to help them convince you to drop the lawsuit and come to your senses. How did that proceed?" I told them that the individual who needs to come to their senses isn't you. I also told them that if they dedicated half as much energy examining their own behavior as they've dedicated attempting to control yours, they might actually make some progress. What did they say to that? "Your mother cried. Your father got angry. They accused me of being manipulated by you, which I found quite insulting." Do they genuinely believe I'm so simple that I can't observe a recording and comprehend what I'm witnessing? I could hear the steel in my grandmother's voice, the identical tone she had employed when I was a child and required protection from playground bullies. Except now, she was protecting me from my own parents. "At my age," she continued, "I don't have time for individuals who refuse to take responsibility for their actions. Life is too short to pretend that cruelty is acceptable merely because it comes from family." After we disconnected, I recognized that my family's response to this crisis had revealed something important. When compelled to choose between acknowledging their behavior and losing relationships, they were willing to lose relationships. That choice told me everything I required to know about how they actually valued me compared to how they valued being correct. 4 months after the dinner, Natasha telephoned with news I had been both expecting and dreading. "Your parents' attorney has made a settlement offer," she said. "They want to meet in person to discuss terms." "What variety of terms?" "The usual. They'll pay a modest sum in exchange for you signing a non-disclosure agreement and dropping all legal action. No admission of wrongdoing, no public apology, merely money to make the problem disappear." I wasn't surprised. Throughout this process, my parents had made it clear that they perceived this situation as a public relations problem rather than a genuine reckoning with their behavior. They wanted to purchase my silence, not address the underlying issues that had led to this point. "What do you think?" I asked. "That depends on what you want to accomplish," Natasha replied. "If you want money and closure, this might be the fastest path. If you want accountability and genuine change, we continue with the lawsuit." I contemplated that conversation for 3 days before making my decision. The settlement meeting was held in a sterile conference room at my parents' attorney's office. My parents sat on one side of an extensive mahogany table, appearing older and more worn than I had ever witnessed them. Their attorney, a middle-aged man who specialized in making problems disappear for individuals with money, sat between them with a folder full of papers designed to erase the preceding months from existence. Natasha and I sat across from them, and the contrast in energy was noticeable. While my parents appeared like individuals attending their own funeral, I felt more composed and centered than I had in years. Ms. Aldridge, their attorney began, my clients deeply regret that a family misunderstanding has escalated to this level. They're prepared to offer a substantial sum to resolve this matter and permit everyone to move forward. How substantial? Natasha asked. $50,000, he said, sliding a document across the table, in exchange for dismissing all legal claims and agreeing to confidentiality regarding the events of October 14th. I examined the paper without touching it. $50,000 was more money than I had ever seen at once, enough to pay off my student loans and put a down payment on a residence. It was also significantly less than what we could potentially win at trial, but more significantly, it came with strings attached that I wasn't willing to accept. The confidentiality clause is interesting, I said, looking directly at my parents for the first time since entering the room. It essentially states I can never discuss what you did to me, even if you do it again. Marin, my mother said quietly, speaking for the first time since we had sat down, we merely want to put this behind us. We want to be a family again. Do you? I asked, because nothing about this offer suggests you want to be a better family. It suggests you want to be the identical family you've always been, but with a legal agreement ensuring I can't object to it publicly. My father leaned forward. What more do you want from us? We're offering to pay you a significant amount of money. I want you to acknowledge what you did, I said simply. I want you to admit that orchestrating and filming my humiliation wasn't a harmless prank. I want you to apologize for 30 years of treating me like I don't matter. And I want to witness evidence that you comprehend why your behavior was wrong. That's not reasonable, their attorney interjected. My clients aren't admitting any wrongdoing. Then we don't have a deal, I said, standing up. Marin, wait, my mother called as I moved toward the door. Please don't do this. Think about what this will do to the family. I halted and turned back to face her. I have been thinking about the family, Mother. For 30 years, I've been thinking about the family. I've been prioritizing the family's comfort over my own dignity. I've been protecting the family's reputation while you destroyed mine. I've been keeping the family's secrets while you ensured everyone knew mine. My voice was steady, calm, completely controlled. But you know what? I'm finished thinking about the family. From now on, I'm thinking about myself. You're being selfish, my father said, his voice rising slightly. Good, I replied. I'm finally being appropriately selfish. It only required me 30 years to learn how. Outside the attorney's office, Natasha and I discussed the next steps. The settlement rejection meant we would proceed to trial, which could require months, and would be emotionally exhausting for everyone involved. Are you certain about this? She asked. Trials are unpredictable. You could win more than they offered, but you could also lose everything and end up paying their legal fees. I'm certain, I said. This was never genuinely about money anyway. That evening, my device rang. It was my brother Everett, and he sounded desperate. Marin, what the hell is wrong with you? Do you know how much $50,000 is? Do you know how many individuals would sacrifice anything for that variety of money? Apparently, it's how much my parents believe my silence is worth, I replied. That's not what this is about, and you recognize it. They're attempting to repair things, and you're being vindictive. Everett, I said patiently. If someone punched you in the face and then offered you money to pretend it never occurred, would you consider that repairing things? That's completely different. How? There was an extended pause. Because this is family. Exactly, I said. This is family. Which means it should be better than strangers treating each other poorly, not worse. After Everett disconnected, I recognized something had fundamentally shifted in how I perceived my relationships with all of them. For the first time in my existence, I wasn't attempting to maintain connections that required me to accept poor treatment. I wasn't attempting to preserve relationships that only functioned when I permitted myself to be diminished. I was finally free to be myself completely and unapologetically, regardless of whether my family could handle it. And if they couldn't handle it, that was their problem, not mine. The relief of that realization was so profound that I actually laughed aloud in my empty apartment. For the first time in my adult existence, I was putting myself first, and the sky hadn't collapsed. The world hadn't ended. My family's threats about destroying relationships had turned out to be hollow, because relationships that required my silence and submission weren't worth preserving anyway. I was free, and it felt incredible. The trial date was established for 6 weeks after the failed settlement meeting, and the weeks leading up to it brought developments I hadn't anticipated. What had commenced as a civil lawsuit about emotional distress had become something considerably larger as more family members came forward with their own stories about my parents' behavior patterns. Natasha telephoned me on a Tuesday morning with news that transformed everything. "Marin, I've been contacted by 3 of your relatives who want to provide testimony about incidents they witnessed over the years. Additionally, someone has provided us with recordings of conversations where your parents discussed their plans for the dinner and their general attitude toward you." Recordings? I was stunned. "Who possesses recordings?" "Your cousin Marlo. She recently contacted me after hearing about the lawsuit. Apparently, she's been documenting some family interactions over the preceding year because she commenced noticing concerning patterns at gatherings. She had her device recording during a family barbecue last summer, where your parents were discussing plans for your birthday. The recordings Marlo provided were devastating. Hours of conversations between my parents and other family members, where they discussed me with casual cruelty that took my breath away, orchestrating not merely the birthday dinner, but years of other incidents designed to bring me down to earth and teach me not to stand up better than everyone else. 2 months before the dinner, where my father clearly stated that I needed to be knocked down a few pegs, and that the birthday celebration would be the perfect opportunity to remind her where she stands in this family. But the recording that sealed their fate was one where my mother laughed about how they trained me so well to accept whatever we dish out, that they could probably do anything, and she'd just take it. When Natasha played these recordings for me, I felt something break inside my chest. Not break in a manner that damaged me, but break in a manner that finally released me from any lingering guilt or obligation I had been carrying. This wasn't family dysfunction. This wasn't miscommunication or misunderstanding. This was deliberate, calculated psychological abuse that they had been orchestrating and executing for years, confident that I would continue to accept it. "The recordings transform everything," Natasha explained. "This is no longer merely about one incident. This is about a pattern of deliberate psychological abuse with clear evidence of intent and premeditation. 3 days before the trial, my parents' attorney telephoned to request an emergency meeting. This time, they came to Natasha's office, and the dynamic was completely different. My parents appeared exhausted, defeated. Their attorney appeared like someone who had recognized his clients had been lying to him about the facts of the case. "Ms. Aldridge," he began, "my clients would like to make a substantially revised offer to settle this matter." "How substantially revised?" Natasha asked. $75,000, a public apology, and acknowledgement of wrongdoing. No confidentiality requirements. I looked across the table at my parents who couldn't meet my eyes. "What changed?" I asked. Their attorney glanced at his clients, then back at me. "They've become aware that you possess evidence they weren't expecting. Evidence that proves everything I've been saying for 30 years. Evidence that makes this case very challenging to defend," he admitted. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marin, please. We didn't recognize how terrible it appeared from the outside. We believed it was merely normal family teasing." "No, you didn't," I said quietly. "The recordings make it very apparent that you knew precisely what you were doing and why you were doing it." My father finally looked up. "What do you want from us? We're offering you everything you requested." I contemplated that question for an extended moment. What did I want from them? For 30 years, I had wanted them to cherish me the manner parents should cherish their children. I had wanted them to be proud of me, to support me, to treat me with basic respect and dignity. I had wanted them to recognize my worth and celebrate my successes instead of diminishing them. But sitting in that conference room, looking at two individuals who had dedicated decades systematically destroying my self-worth for their own entertainment, I recognized something profound. I didn't want anything from them anymore. I didn't want their affection because they had proven they weren't capable of genuine affection. I didn't want their approval because their approval was worthless. I didn't want their acceptance because accepting me would require them to change fundamentally, and they had proven they preferred to destroy relationships rather than change. I accept the settlement offer, I told their attorney, but I have one additional requirement. What's that? He asked. I want the public apology to include an acknowledgement that this behavior was part of a long-term pattern, and I want them to state that anyone who's been treated this manner by family members should seek help and support rather than accepting it as normal. My parents appeared stricken. You want us to tell other individuals to sue their families? My mother asked. I want you to tell other individuals that emotional abuse isn't acceptable merely because it comes from family members, I corrected. I want you to acknowledge that you dedicated 30 years normalizing behavior that should never be tolerated. The settlement was finalized 2 days later. My parents issued a public statement acknowledging their long-term pattern of emotionally abusive behavior toward our daughter, and encouraging anyone experiencing similar treatment to seek support and understand that this behavior is not normal or acceptable regardless of family relationships. The statement went viral on social media. Within days, I was receiving messages from strangers who had witnessed it and recognized similar patterns in their own families. Individuals who had been told they were too sensitive or needed to learn to accept a joke when they objected to cruel treatment from relatives. My story became something I had never intended it to be. Permission for other individuals to cease accepting unacceptable behavior from family members. But the genuine victory wasn't the money or the public vindication. The genuine victory was departing from that law office knowing that I would never again accept poor treatment from anyone, family or otherwise, and that I finally comprehended my own worth, regardless of whether anyone else recognized it. I was free, and I possessed the legal documentation to prove it. 1 year after the settlement, I was sitting in my new apartment, a spacious place with large windows and a view of the city skyline, when my device rang. The caller ID displayed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it anyway. Marin, this is Celeste Morrison. I found your number through your public statement about family abuse. I hope it's acceptable that I'm calling you directly. Of course, I said, settling into the armchair I had purchased specifically because I loved it, not because it matched anything else, or because someone else approved of it. I wanted to thank you, Celeste continued, her voice trembling slightly. Your story gave me the courage to leave an abusive situation with my own family. I've been in therapy for 6 months now, and I'm finally beginning to comprehend that the manner they treated me wasn't normal. I had received dozens of similar calls and messages over the preceding year. Individuals who had witnessed my story and recognized their own experiences in it. Individuals who had believed they were alone in confronting family members who used affection as a weapon and guilt as a control mechanism. I'm so glad you reached out, I told Celeste. How are you doing now? Better. Not perfect, but better. I moved across the country, changed my telephone number, and commenced over completely. Some days are more challenging than others, but I'm learning what it feels like to exist without constantly walking on eggshells. After we disconnected, I reflected on how drastically my existence had transformed since that October evening when I had walked into Vincenzo's restaurant, expecting merely another round of family humiliation. The lawsuit settlement had provided financial security, but more significantly, it had provided validation. Having my experience acknowledged in legal documents, having my parents publicly admit their behavior was wrong, having evidence that my perception of reality was accurate, had been healing in ways I hadn't expected. But the genuine transformation had been internal. I had learned to trust my own judgment about what was acceptable and what wasn't. I had learned to prioritize my own well-being over other individuals' comfort. I had learned that being alone was infinitely better than being with individuals who diminished me. Most surprisingly, I had learned that I actually liked myself when I wasn't constantly attempting to earn approval from individuals who were determined not to provide it. My relationship with my extended family had evolved in interesting ways. My grandparents had become closer to me than they had ever been when I was attempting to maintain peace with my parents. Several cousins had reached out to rebuild connections that didn't require pretending my parents' behavior was acceptable. The family members who genuinely cared about me had found ways to maintain relationships that honored my boundaries. The relatives who couldn't accept that I was no longer willing to be the family scapegoat had gradually faded from my existence, and I discovered that their absence created space for healthier relationships with individuals who actually valued me. My parents had honored the terms of the settlement by issuing the public apology and paying the damages, but there had been no further contact between us. They had made no attempt to have genuine conversations about repairing our relationship, which told me everything I required to know about their priorities. I had grieved the parents I had wanted them to be, but I had ceased grieving the relationship I had actually had with them. That relationship had been harmful to me, and its absence was a gift, not a loss. My career had flourished without the constant drain of family stress. I had been promoted twice and was considering launching my own consulting firm. My personal relationships had improved dramatically once I had learned to recognize warning signs and establish boundaries. I was dating someone who treated me with genuine respect and kindness. And the contrast with my family experiences had helped me appreciate what healthy relationships actually resembled. Most significantly, I had learned to be my own advocate. I no longer waited for other individuals to defend me or validate my experiences. I no longer attempted to convince individuals who were determined to misunderstand me. I no longer accepted crumbs of affection from individuals who should have been providing genuine love and support. That evening, as I was preparing for bed, I found myself contemplating the moment at Vincenzo's, when I had articulated those 3 words that transformed everything. I recorded everything. Those words hadn't merely exposed my family's behavior. They had marked the moment when I ceased being a victim and commenced being the author of my own story. For 30 years, other individuals had written my narrative. They had decided who I was, what I was worth, how I should be treated. They had convinced me that their version of reality was the only valid one, that their assessment of my value was accurate, that their treatment of me was what I deserved. But in that restaurant, surrounded by individuals who believed they were about to enjoy another round of entertainment at my expense, I had finally taken control of the narrative. I had demonstrated to them that their version of events only functioned when no one else could witness what they were genuinely doing. I had proven that their power over me was entirely dependent on my willingness to accept it. I had established that their assessment of my worth was meaningless compared to my own. The recording I had made that evening had become evidence in a legal case, but it had been something more important than that. Proof that I finally comprehended my own value and was willing to defend it. As I turned off the lights in my apartment, the identical apartment my parents had once criticized as too small and in the wrong neighborhood, I experienced something I had never experienced before: complete satisfaction with my own choices. I had constructed an existence that reflected who I actually was, rather than who other individuals believed I should be. I had surrounded myself with individuals who appreciated me rather than individuals who tolerated me. I had created a space where I could be entirely myself without fear of judgment or punishment. The birthday dinner that was supposed to be my final humiliation had instead become the moment of my liberation. And unlike the family jokes at my expense, this victory would never get old. If this story resonated with you, ensure you like and subscribe for more stories about finding the courage to stand up for yourself, even when it means standing alone. Sometimes the family we choose is healthier than the family we're born into, and sometimes departing is the strongest thing you can do. Remember, you don't owe anyone access to your existence, especially individuals who utilize that access to wound you. Your peace is worth more than their approval, and you deserve relationships that add to your existence instead of subtracting from it. Where are you in your own journey of establishing boundaries with difficult family members? Share your story in the comments below. You might be surprised how many individuals comprehend exactly what you're experiencing. Actually, permit me to be completely honest with you for a moment. As I sit here in my peaceful apartment, glass of wine in hand, observing the city lights, I can't help but smile when I contemplate that cake. Cheers to yet another year of total failure. Well, Mother and Father, congratulations on another year of being precisely who I always recognized you were. The only difference is now everyone else recognizes it as well. And you know what?